Let's talk about death.
Whoa, wait, what?
Sorry, let's talk about the stuff after death.
Like, why do we bury the dead? Where did the idea begin?
Yep, it's something we're so used to and it's just what we do, but why do we do it?
The US funeral industry takes in $20 million annually.
Some cultures believe you're gone once you die, but others unbury their dead yearly for a celebration.
So, we believe learning about the world around us, the different cultures, is important.
We're here to explore different perspectives and feed your curiosity. Please like and subscribe to our channel if you enjoy this video.
The industry is enormous. Thinking about people making this much money off our loved ones doesn't seem great.
So let's talk about how we got here. Burying our dead isn't just uniquely human.
All animals are affected by death. Some have rituals and feel grief.
But what's unique to humans is the time, care, and money put into it.
Every culture has a different way of dealing with their deceased loved ones.
So first, we'll go over the history behind why we bury our dead.
After that, we'll talk about different cultural beliefs and practices around the world.
When a loved one dies, the obvious thing is to bury them.
Humans have been burying the dead since ancient times.
However, it's uncertain when that began. The oldest known burial is thought to have taken place 130,000 years ago.
Evidence shows that Neanderthals practiced the burying of the dead.
The dead were buried with tools and weapons during this era.
It's thought that it began with religious rituals over the concern of what happened after people died.
The bodies were found in a much more intact state, meaning they were probably buried quickly after death.
It's possible they believed in afterlife, which is why tools and weapons were buried with them.
It's unclear if this was the reason, and there's no way of us knowing for sure.
Burying the dead 6 feet under was mandatory in response to the bubonic plague.
The main idea behind this was most likely to prevent the spread of infection,
Coffins initially started to be used to prevent animals from disturbing bodies.
and later give the dead a peaceful and comfortable resting place.
Some cultures also use coffins to keep the dead from rising after death.
Of course, science tells us we're not going anywhere once we die.
But there are still many questions about death. So who's to say someone wouldn't get back up and start walking around?
The most popular belief is that people bury bodies because of dead bodies decaying.
People saw that the best way to deal with the smell of decaying was to bury the body.
It was easy to dig a hole in the ground and bury the body to prevent the smell from disturbing the community.
This is evidenced by the fact that people buried carcasses of animals in the same way.
Burying the dead has been adopted by people of different cultures and religious beliefs worldwide today.
Many people find it a natural course of action to take when they face the death of a loved one.
Burials were mentioned throughout the Bible, and it seems to not be buried was considered shameful or divine punishment.
Bible custom states that bodies were able to be buried that same day before sundown.
And similar to today, it was said bodies were buried wearing their favorite everyday clothing.
After that, they spent time with family and friends like a funeral we hold today.
A full Catholic funeral involves much more structure during the service. There's little flexibility because it's all approved by the Vatican.
Christian and Catholic funerals are very similar, but Catholic funerals might have more emphasis on prayer.
Christian funerals may have more emphasis on family involvement, like telling stories.
Jewish funerals are usually held within 24 hours and are relatively simple.
Jewish tradition specifies the deceased's body is not to be left alone.
Family and friends are expected to stay with the body, or the shomer can be assigned to stay with the body.
The shomer is expected to stay awake and attentive until another person can stand watch.
It's tradition to tear a piece of your clothes when someone dies to symbolize the loss.
The deceased will be buried wearing either a prayer shroud for men or white burial shroud for women.
Cremation is not accepted in the Jewish tradition, and open caskets are only for family before service.
The deceased's immediate family will mourn for 7 days in a mourning period called Shiva.
If the family has any mirrors in the home, they may be turned backwards or covered so there's no reflections.
The community brings food to the family so they can spend this time reminiscing and telling stories of their loved ones. In African culture, it's believed that burial can prevent the deceased individual from coming back and creating chaos.
If the deceased is not buried correctly, his ghost will remain, wander around, and cause harm.
Part of the practice in Africa is to turn all pictures to face the wall and cover windows and reflective surfaces.
In South Africa, the windows are smeared with ashes and the bed is removed from the person's bedroom.
Similar to the Jewish tradition, they hold vigil in the home where people come to pay respect.
Death rituals for removing the bodies are meant to confuse the dead, so they can't find their way back home too soon.
One way is through a hole in the wall so it can be sealed back up. Some others are exiting feet first or in a zigzag path.
Throwing obstacles like thorns, branches, and barriers is a way to deter the spirits from returning.
The deceased may be wrapped in his clothes for burial and covered with the skin of a slaughtered animal.
Some groups ban children and unmarried people from attending the funeral.
Sometimes there are reburial preparations, fancy coffins, and events which can last for years.
This contrasts the more private and quieter death rituals in modern Europe and other Western countries.
The Navajo have a legend that explains why death exists in the world. One day, the Navajo people placed an animal hide in the water.
If it didn't sink, no one would ever die. However, death would be part of life if the hide dropped into the water.
Instead of watching the hide, the Navajo turned away. While their backs were turned, a coyote threw some rocks on top of the fur.
Of course, this made it sink into the water.
To the coyote, if no one ever died, there would come a point in which there wouldn't be any more land for people to live on.
One of the common Navajo beliefs about death is that the deceased go to the underworld when they die.
Navajos are very reluctant to look at a dead body. Contact with the body is limited to only a few individuals.
When death is imminent, the person is taken to a different place until they die.
If a person passes away in their home, the dwelling is torn down and destroyed.
After death, 2 men are trusted with preparing the body for burial.
During this process, they do not wear clothes and they only wear moccasins.
Before starting the process, they smear ash all over their bodies.
The ash is thought to protect them from evil spirits.
Once the body is buried, they ensure no footprint is left behind. The tools used to dig the grave are destroyed.
Crying and outward demonstrations of grief are not usually seen when someone dies.
The Navajo believe that spirits' journeys to the next world can be interrupted if too much emotion is shown.
They also believe that the spirit can attach itself to a place, an object, or a person if the process is interrupted.
So, let's get into the culture that unburies their dead each year for celebration.
The Turahan people in Indonesia keep their dead relatives at home, feeding and cuddling their bodies.
When they're finally buried, they dig them up each year for celebration.
The bodies are mummified and cared for as though they're still living.
They believe that after death, the soul remains in the house, so the dead are treated to food, water, and clothing.
Kids learn from a very young age to deal with death and accept it as part of the journey.
They feed the deceased daily and keep their corpse in a separate room until they have a funeral.
The ritual is known as manene, which means care for ancestors, and traditionally takes place in August.
The dead are brought out from their graves, washed, clothed, and brought to the village.
Friends and family will travel miles to be reunited with their deceased loved ones and enjoy a feast.
It's also when the younger generation can meet their ancestors for the first time.
They will often pose for photographs with the bodies or take a selfie.
Eventually, the dead will be returned to their coffins, and relatives will leave them with new gifts.
Several generations ago, a hunter named Pong Rumasek roamed the hills of Turahan.
He found an abandoned corpse lying under the tree. He wrapped them in clothes and buried them.
Just after this happened, he was blessed with lifelong luck and wealth. The rumor about the lucky hunter started to spread.
Ever since, they believe they'll get rewarded if they take care of their ancestors.
So those rituals are about as far away as it gets from ours here in America.
The culture's intimacy between living and dead may seem strange to the modern world.
But the Western idea of abandoning the elders, the number of retirement homes, and outsourced tomb care would shock them.
Every culture has a different way of dealing with death and the bodies of their loved ones.
For some, this is a taboo subject, but I find it really interesting, and I hope some of you do.
I think it's important to have a different perspective and learn about different cultures' ways of life.
So we hope you guys enjoyed this video, and would really appreciate if you subscribe to our channel.
As always, we challenge you to get out there and ask more questions. And remember, always stay curious.